Bruchim Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Hey Amud Aleph, starting with Daf Dalid Amud Beis, 6 lines from the bottom. Our Gemara returns to its discussion of the crossbeam, the kara that is on the entrance to the mavui. The Mishnah had stated if it's above Esrim Amma, it's not valid. We know that a kara has to span the entire width of the entranceway. It also has to have itself a width of 1 tefach. Now the Gemara discusses what one has to do in order to mesakein the airspace so that the crossbeam is within the amount of space that is necessary. Says the Gemara, Hayagavoya me'esim amo ubola ma'atoi. If you have a height that is greater than esrim amma, then he comes to Memayit, he comes to Lesin to reduce that airspace. Kama Memayit, how much does he have to then reduce? Ask the Gemara, Kama Memayit, Kama Detzorichle. How much does he have to reduce? Depends on how much he needs in terms of what exactly is the airspace. Lefia Inyan. If it's 21 amos, then you have to reduce another amma. If it's 22 amos, you have to reduce 2 amos, so long as that the crossbeam is within 20 amos. Ella rochboy bekama. No, what he meant to ask was, what is the depth when you go from the cross beam, the entranceway, what is the depth that you have to then also add when you go ahead and reduce the height? Here the Gemara is talking about that they're going to then reduce the airspace by raising the ground. So once you raise the ground, so that it's going to be within Esrim Amma, how much depth within the mavui do you have to go to make this a valid crossbeam? Says the Gemara, Leimo Rav Yosef Amar Tefach Abaye Mar Arba. Rav Yosef says you have to add a tefach into the depth of the mavui, and that's enough valid so that when you lower the airspace, you have 1 tefach deep. According to Abai, however, no, you have to actually add arba tfachim within the depth of the mavui. Let us suggest they're arguing about the following. That the one who says a tefach is sufficient is because he understands he can use the space underneath the mavui, since that's a tefach space, and therefore we looked at the edge of the outer edge of this tefach of the kara, and we extend it down, so that we then can use the space underneath. You'll have a heker of the mavui above. However, the other manda omar, daf hey amid aleph at the top, umanda omar arba kisovar also lishtamish tachas. He understands that you cannot use the space of the mavui underneath to carry, and therefore we extend the inner edge of the tefach of the kara down, so that you have to then have a heker to extend an additional 3 tefachim. Because if you are going to be outside, we're not using that tefach underneath, you won't have a heker. So you have to then go to a shear that's chashuv, which is going to be a full 4 tefachim, and add 3 tefachim to the tefach that's underneath the kara. The Gemara says, Loi, that's not the machlokes. The kuli alma kisava chasavre mutar lishtamish tachas kara. Everybody agrees that you can use that 1 tefach space underneath the kara. Ubehaka mifli. So what is the machlokes? If you can use the space underneath, says the Gemara, Mar savakar mishum heker, umar savakar mishum mechitza. The one who says, Rav Yosef, that 1 tefach is enough because you have a heker. So therefore, since you're using the space underneath the kara, therefore you see that the kara is above within 20 amos. Whereas the other manda Amar Abai says, since you need to make a mechitza, here the Gemara goes with a switch, it changes, and it says the only way you can go ahead and validly bring down the edge of the kara to make it an extension of a wall is only when it's within 20 tefachim. So 20 amos rather. Therefore, when you then extend the outer edge of the wall, so therefore to make it a valid wall, it has to have a partition of arba tefachim. So therefore, only then is it going to be sufficient. So that's why he says when you go ahead and lower the airspace to make it within 20 amos, you also have to have arba atfachim wide. Meaning deep. The Gemara says, V'i bois ema, alternatively you can say the kuli alma kore mishum heker. That everybody says that the crossbeam is a heker, so one should not carry in the Rishus Harabim. But they're arguing about whether the heker down below has to be only the same width as the heker above, which is 1 tefach, or not. The Mar Savra Amin heker shel mato ke heker shel malo. Umar Savra lo yamin heker shel mato ke heker shel malo. According to Rav Yosef, 1 tefach is enough because just like we have 1 tefach above, which is the tefach of the kara, so too a tefach down below is equal heker, and that's sufficient. Whereas Rav Yosef says it's true, the heker above is 1 tefach, but down below that wouldn't be sufficient. You need arba tefachim. Alternatively, you can say the kuli almo amrin heker shel mata ke heker shel malo. That everybody agrees that the 1 tefach below is sufficient as a heker like the 1 tefach above. If that's the case, why does Abai require dalet tefachim? But here they're arguing about that maybe the people trample on that space down below, on the ground down below, they'll end up then eroding that dirt. So there'll no longer be a tefach. So therefore, Abai was concerned and said you must therefore have 4 tefachim in the depths of this mavui, so that in case that would happen, you have then 3 additional tefachim. The Gemara now turns to the other extreme. Before we were talking about when you have a crossbeam that is higher than Esrim Amma, which is invalid, has to be lower than Esrim Amma. That's the maximum height. Whereas now the Gemara says the minimum height has to be at least Asar Tfachim. So what happens when you don't have yet Asar Tfachim? Says the Gemara, Hayapachas me Asar Tfachim. If a person has less than 10 tefachim and he wants to go ahead and dig into the ground to then make it so there's enough airspace of asar tefachim between the ground and the crossbeam, kama choykek, how much does he have to dig in? Ask the Gemara similarly, kama choykek, ba'med tzorich lei. You only have to then choykek according to the inyan. If you have 8 tefachim, then you have to choykek at least 2 tefachim. If you have 9 tefachim, you have to choykek 1 tefach to be mashlim dasar tefachim. No, ella mishkoi bekama. The Gemara meant to ask, how much do you have to go in the depths in order to then make this a valid mavui? In other words, granted that you have now the asar tefachim, but how much do you have to then extend into the mavui so that you have the asar tefachim? Rav Yosef amar bedalid, Abai amar bedalid amos. Rav Yosef says 4 tefachim. Abai says 4 amos. Here Rav Yosef says 4 tefachim. Unlike before when he said 1 tefach, here requires 4 tefachim. The difference is because before we already had valid walls, only they were too high. So therefore he said 1 tefach is enough in going to the depth inside of the mavui. But over here, when you don't yet have walls, you have to create the walls when you're choykek into the ground. So therefore, in order to make a valid partition, you have to have arba tefachim. So therefore, Rav Yosef requires a minimum of 4 tefachim to be a hechsher mavui. Abai Amar be'arba amos. Abai says a hechsher mavui, the wall of a mavui, is a minimum of dalid amos. And therefore, when you make a chakika so that you have enough of asar tefachim, you have to then go the depth of the mavui of at least arba amos. The Gemara now says, Leiman b'de Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi kameflu. Let us suggest that their machloikis is based on the statement that Rav Ami, Rav Asi stated. The itmar mavui shenifratz mitzidoi klape roish. If you have a mavui that had a breach on one of its walls, which is towards the entranceway of the mavui, itma mishmei de Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi. Im yesham pas dalid matir bepirtza ad eser. If you have a plank of dalid from the Pesach of the mavui until the breach, then that will permit the carrying in the mavui as long as that breach is within Eser Amos. Then the kara is going to be a valid kara, a valid crossbeam. The imlav, however, if not, if you don't have a pas dalid tfachim, then pachos mishlosha matir, only if the breach is within 3 tfachim, because then we'll say lavud, and that's going to be then okay. It'll be like the wall is closed, and thereby then the kar will be matir, the mavui. Shlosha eino matir, but if it's 3 whole tfachim, then we don't have lavud anymore, and therefore that breach will then make it, this whole mavui, that's going to be invalid. The kar will no longer then matir a person to carry within that mavui. So the Gemara suggests over here that Rav Yosef goes like Rav Ami Rav Asi, and Abai doesn't. The Rav Yosef islay the Rabbi Ami, la Abai leslay the Rabbi Ami. Since Rav Yosef says you only need to go arba tfachim, that's like Rav Ami Rav Asi. Therefore, this is the machlokes between the two of them. O malach Abaye, Abaye says, Hasam soif mavui, hochat chilas mavui. Over there, it's talking about fixing up the mavui. Since there's a pirza, to make then a mavui valid, then you need arba tfachim, a pas of dalid. So even I would agree with that. However, to make the length of a mavui, the wall of a mavui, from the beginning, that requires dalid amos. Iika arba im, amos in, ilo loy. So therefore, that's not a valid way of explaining the machlokes, because even I would agree with Rav Ami, Rav Asi, says Abaye. Omar Abaye mino aminala. Where do I know to say that the length of the mavui wall must be arba amos? The Tanya states in the Brisa, Ein mavui nitar belechi v'kara ad shebatim v'chatziros besuchim l'seichai. In order for a mavui to be valid with a lechi and a kara, you have to have at least 2 chatzeros opening into the mavui. V'i bedalid heich mishkazle. If it's only dalid tfachim, like Rav Yosef wants to taina, then how can you have 2 chatzeros opening up into the mavui? If you have 1 chatzer opening on one side and 1 chatzer opening on the other side, each one a full arba tfachim, because each pesach of a chatzer and any pesach has to be a minimum of dalid tfachim. So then you have the entire length, really, of the mavui itself, and that wouldn't be a possibility because the chatzer pesach not only includes the arba tfachim, but it also includes side posts. So you can't have a minimum of arba tfachim of a mavui with an arba chatzera of a pesach of arba of a chatzer entering into it. So that's not a possibility. If you're going to say that's not where the chatzeros enter, rather we're talking about it enters at the end where the dead end is. There's 2 chatzeros that are then opening into the mavui, whereby each one we're saying is a minimum of arba tfachim. So you have a width of the mavui of 8 tfachim, and the length, according to Rav Yosef, would be only arba tfachim. So says Abai, that's also not going to be valid, because after all, we have a Nemasara. What is a mavui that is valid with a lechi and a mavui? When the length of the mavui is greater than the width of the mavui. So over here, if we're going to go according to Rav Yosef, that the length is only arba tfachim and the width is 8 tfachim, then that will be invalid. Rav Yosef answers the posach lei bekeren zovis. The 2 chatzeros are opening up at the corners diagonally. Take a look at the diagram of Rashi on the bottom of the right hand corner. Rashi shows that the first tefach that is into the mavui, the depth is 1 tefach in, and then from there there's a diagonal going across, so that enables then the chatzah to enter, to be the entranceway into the mavui, whereby you can still, according to Rav Yosef, have a length of arba tfachim on each side. Omar Abai goes on to say again, Meno aminala. Where do I know to say that the wall of a mavui must be arba amos? The Omar Rabbi Amma Marchama Amar Afhuna Lechi haboileit b'doif noishel mavui. If you have a lechi, a side post that is on the entranceway that is going into the width of the entranceway, and it's less than arba amos, pachos me arba amos nido mishum lechi ve'eino tzorich lechi acher lahatiroi. If it's within daled amos, then you don't need another lechi. This is sufficient to permit one to carry within the mavui. However, daled amos nidon mishum mavui v'tzorich lechi acher lahatiro. But if it's a full daled amos that's going across the entranceway of the mavui, then we say that this is no longer a lechi, this is a wall of a mavui. So says Abai, you see that the wall of a mavui must be arba amos. Says the Gemara, Rav Yosef la puke mitoras lechi adiika arba amos. Rav Yosef, when we come to take away the status of a lechi, then we need arba amos. And therefore, I would agree over here that indeed arba amos is necessary, because it's no longer going to be a lechi, we would need another lechi. But lemahave mavui afilu ba'arba tfachim nami have mavui. But to make a mavui, that is sufficient to have a length of arba tfachim. So it comes out in summary that in regards to the maximum height, when we raise the ground to make so that there's a proper lechi above, so there's a machlokes Rav Yosef and Abai. Rav Yosef says you have to go a depth of 1 tefach into the mavui, whereas Abai says you have to go arba tefachim. That's in regards to when we had the height that was greater than esrim amo. When you had a minimum, so there was less than asar tefachim, and we had to then dig into the ground to make an airspace so that there's at least asar tefachim. So here, Rav Yosef says you need to make a depth of arba tefachim from the entranceway. And Abai says you need arba amos, because they're arguing about what is considered to be the wall of a mavui. According to Rav Yosef, it's sufficient to have arba tefachim. According to Abai, you need arba amos.